Millionaire kept his new wife in the basement, so she called. The brown envelope on my desk made my heart freeze. My hands trembled as I stared at the red confidential stamp on its surface. That moment, in my office at the Blackwood Mansion, would forever mark the line between my previous life and what I was about to discover. 3 months earlier, I was just Briar Anderson, editor-in-chief of Seattle Life magazine, used to uncovering other people's stories, but I never imagined that my own life would turn into the biggest investigation I had ever faced. The day I met Reed began like any other in Pioneer Square, except for the storm that was punishing the city. The Lunar coffee shop was practically empty when I walked in, drenched and annoyed at having forgotten my umbrella. While trying to save my laptop from the damp, I bumped into someone. "Let me help you," said a deep, gentle voice. When I looked up, I met the most intense gaze I had ever seen, deep blue eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 secrets. Reed introduced himself with a smile that lit up his whole face. Tall, with brown hair slightly graying at the temples, he had a presence that commanded attention without being intimidating. A corporate lawyer, he explained, specializing in mergers and acquisitions. We talked for hours, completely oblivious to the storm outside. Our relationship progressed like a wildfire in a dry forest. The chemistry was undeniable, and every moment together seemed predestined. Reed was attentive, cultured, and had that air of mystery that intrigued me professionally. Within 3 months, we were married in an intimate ceremony at his estate on Mercer Island. The Blackwood Mansion was impressive, a meticulously restored Victorian building overlooking Lake Washington. Reed had told me that the house had been in his family for generations, but something in his tone always seemed evasive when it came to his family history. My best friend and the magazine's photographer, Madison Carter, warned me that everything was happening too fast. "Bree, you barely know his family," she said on the eve of the wedding. I laughed at her concerns. After all, I knew enough. Reed had a younger sister, Charlotte, who was undergoing treatment at a private clinic in Switzerland. Her parents had died in a car accident 5 years ago. What secrets could there be? The answer began to reveal itself in the 3rd week after our honeymoon. Working late in my new office at the mansion, I noticed something strange about the floor under the Persian carpet, a subtle difference in the texture of the wood. Curiosity has always been my weakness, and after removing the carpet, I discovered a perfectly camouflaged little door. The secret cellar was a complete archive: documents, photographs, receipts. At first, I thought they were just old family records, until I noticed the recent dates and the astronomical amounts in the transactions. The law firm where Reed worked, Blackwood & Associates, appeared on practically every document, along with the names of prominent Seattle politicians and powerful businessmen. I spent the whole night analyzing those papers, my stomach turning with each new discovery. Money laundering schemes, bribes, fraudulent contracts, all meticulously documented. The worst part was not the crimes themselves, but the signature that was repeated on document after document. Reed Blackwood. When the sun rose, I was still in the basement, surrounded by evidence that destroyed everything I believed about the man I had married. That's when I heard footsteps on the stairs. Reed stood in the doorway, his face a mask of pain and resignation. "I can explain," he said softly, "but you need to understand that not everything is as it seems." At that moment, sitting in my office a week later, staring at the envelope containing yet more evidence that Madison had obtained through her sources, I knew I was at a point of no return. The phone rang, making me jump. It was the number for Charlotte's hospital in Switzerland. The nurse's words on the other end of the line confirmed my latest suspicions. Charlotte was terminally ill, and her experimental treatment cost a fortune. I hung up the phone, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. The pieces were starting to fall into place, forming a puzzle that I wasn't sure I wanted to complete. Reed had taken on his father's crimes to keep his sister treated, using his position in the company to continue the scheme that kept Charlotte alive. Every document I found deepened the moral dilemma I was now facing. As a journalist, I had a duty to expose the truth. As a wife, my heart bled for Reed's impossible sacrifice. The sun was beginning to set over Lake Washington, painting the sky with shades of red that reminded me of the stamp on the envelope. Somewhere in the mansion, I heard Reed coming home from work, his footsteps echoing through the wooden corridors. It was time to confront the truth, but which truth would I choose to follow? The phone, still warm in my hands, seemed to weigh a ton. The Swiss nurse's voice echoed in my mind as I watched Reed cross the office towards me. His smile, once so comforting, now carried a different weight. How many more secrets did that smile hide? "I've just spoken to Charlotte's clinic," I said before he could kiss me. The smile disappeared from his face, replaced by an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of fear and resignation. "How much do you know?" The question came out as a whisper as he leaned on the edge of my desk, his knuckles white from squeezing the wood. "Enough to understand that I'm married to a man I don't really know," I replied, pulling the documents out of the envelope Madison had sent me. I found records of monthly transfers of $300,000 to an account in the Cayman Islands. The same amount as Charlotte's experimental treatment. Reed ran his hands over his face, seeming to age 10 years and seconds. "My father started this 15 years ago," he began, sitting down heavily in the leather armchair. "Blackwood and Associates was always respected in Seattle, but he had vices, gambling mainly. He started small, embezzling client funds to cover debts. When Charlotte became ill at the age of 16, the embezzlement increased." As he spoke, I flipped through the documents found in the basement. Dates, amounts, names of front companies. Everything fitted into a complex web of corruption that stretched back for years. "When our parents died," Reed continued, his voice breaking, "I found out everything. Charlotte needed the treatment and I couldn't let her die. I took control of my father's operations, refined the system, made sure the money kept flowing to keep her alive. Why don't you seek legal help? There are foundations, research programs. The treatment is experimental, Briar, not approved by the FDA. No insurance, no foundation would touch it. It was either that or watch my sister wither away in 6 months." I got up and walked over to the window. Lake Washington reflected the city lights like 1,000 fallen stars. "Why did you marry me?" "Knowing that I'm a journalist, that I seek the truth by profession." Reed moved closer but didn't touch me. "Because for the first time in 5 years when I was with you, I forgot I was a criminal. You made me feel real again, Briar. Worthy of love." The silence that followed was interrupted by the ringing of my cell phone. It was Madison. "Bree, you need to see this. I've just received more documents. It's bigger than we thought. It's not just about his sister." I put the phone on speaker. Reed remained motionless, listening to Madison reveal connections to corrupt politicians and scrupulous businessmen, even a federal judge. The scheme his father had started had grown into a well-oiled money laundering machine that served dozens of powerful people. "There's more," Madison continued. "I found records of a secondary account. Someone is embezzling money from the embezzlement, if that makes sense. Large monthly sums that aren't going to the clinic in Switzerland." Reed paled. "That's impossible. I control all the accounts." I picked up my laptop, opening the files Madison had just sent. "Here." I pointed to the screen. "It started 3 months ago, just when we got married." "Someone found out," Reed muttered, starting to pace around the office. "Someone is using this against me. Against us." The sound of breaking glass downstairs made us freeze. Heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. Reed ran to my desk, grabbing the documents. "Go out the back door," he whispered urgently. "Go to the Fairmont Hotel. Use the name Andrews to register. I'll find you as soon as I can." "Reed, what's going on?" "Don't trust anyone," he said, pushing me towards the secret door that led to the service staircase. "Not even me, until I explain everything." "Please, Briar Doe." I went down the stairs in the dark, my heart hammering against my ribs. Through the walls, I heard male voices and the sound of drawers being violently opened. When I reached the back garden, lantern lights swept through the office windows. I drove through the streets of Seattle like a fugitive, constantly checking the rearview mirror. The Fairmont in the city center was one of the safest and most discreet hotels I knew. As I waited at the reception desk, I noticed a man in a dark suit watching me from the lobby. "Miss Andrews," the receptionist called out. handing me a key card. Enjoy your stay. In the elevator, my hands were shaking so much that I could barely press the button for the 14th floor. When the doors opened, the corridor was deserted. I entered the room, locking the door and rushing to the windows to close the curtains. It was then that I saw the white envelope on the king-size bed. Inside was just one photo. Reed, younger, next to Charlotte and a man I recognized from the newspapers. A businessman found dead on his yacht 3 years ago. On the back, a handwritten message. Not everything is about love and family. Ask your husband about Marcus Sterling. I sat on the edge of the bed, the photo trembling in my hands, as sirens began to sound in the distance. The night was just beginning, and I had a feeling that the secrets I found in the basement were only the surface of something much deeper and more dangerous. The photo of Marcus Sterling in my hands was like a time bomb about to explode. I remembered the news coverage of his death. The body found on the luxury yacht anchored in Puget Sound, officially registered as a heart attack. At the time, I was just a rookie investigative reporter, but something about that case never felt right. 3 soft knocks on the bedroom door made me jump. Room service, a female voice announced. My heart raced. I hadn't ordered anything. Madison? I whispered through the door, recognizing my friend's voice. Open up soon, Bree. I have some news that will interest you. Madison walked in carrying a thick briefcase in her laptop. Her normally cheerful face was marked by worry. I found out something about Marcus Sterling, she said, spreading documents out on the bed. He was the main investor in an experimental research project for Charlotte's disease. What do you mean? Sterling Pharmaceuticals was developing a revolutionary treatment. 3 months before his death, it had gained approval for clinical trials in Europe. After he died, the project was shelved and the funds mysteriously transferred to offshore accounts. My mind began to connect the dots. The treatment Charlotte is receiving in Switzerland, it's the same, Madison confirmed. But here's the interesting detail. I found records of a meeting between Sterling and Alexander Blackwood, Reed's father, a week before Sterling's death. I grabbed my cell phone, opening the browser to look up the Sterling case. Old headlines popped up on the screen. Pharmaceutical magnate dies of 52, Sterling empire in dispute after CEO's sudden death. There's more, Madison continued, turning her laptop towards me. Look who took control of Sterling Pharmaceuticals patents after his death. On the screen, a corporate document showed the name of a company, Phoenix Medical Research, registered in the Cayman Islands. The same destination as Reed's monthly transfers. The money isn't just going to Charlotte's treatment, I concluded, feeling a chill run down my spine. Someone is profiting from Sterling's research. A news alert on my cell phone interrupted our conversation. Blackwood mentioned targeted for search and seizure. I read aloud. Federal agents have executed a warrant at the residence of prominent attorney Reed Blackwood. We need to find Charlotte, Madison declared. If she's really receiving this experimental treatment, she's the key to understanding all of this. The clinic in Switzerland, I began, but Madison was already shaking her head. I checked. The address is fake, but I traced the drug deliveries. They go to a private clinic in Vancouver, Canada. My cell phone vibrated with a text message from an unknown number. Hotel Barrage. 10 minutes. Come alone. Or it's Reed, I said to Madison. He wants to meet me in the garage. It could be a trap, she warned. That man in the lobby was following me. I had to drive around the block 3 times to lose him. I looked at Sterling's photo again. The dead businessman's confident smile seemed to mock me. I need to go. Reed might have the answers we're looking for. Then I'll go with you. No, I insisted. Keep investigating Phoenix Medical. There's something bigger going on here, something that goes beyond money laundering and corporate corruption. Madison reluctantly agreed, but handed me a small device. GPS, put it in your pocket. If anything goes wrong, I'll know where to find you. The elevator to the garage seemed to take forever. Every second increased my anxiety. When the doors opened, the cold, dimly lit environment welcomed me with ominous shadows between the parked cars. Reed, I called softly, walking between the rows of vehicles. An engine started softly behind me. I turned to find not Reed, but a young woman at the wheel of a black Mercedes. Even though she was pale and visibly ill, her face bore unmistakable Blackwood features. "Charlotte, come in," she said, her voice weak but urgent. "Reed will be coming. He's being questioned by the FBI right now. We need to go before they get here. How can I trust you?" She held out an envelope through the open glass. Inside was an old photo, Charlotte at 16, next to Marcus Sterling in a laboratory. "Because I know the truth about his death," she replied. "And if we don't leave now, we'll be next." The sound of tires singing on the upper level of the garage made my decision for me. I got into the car just as two black SUVs appeared on the access ramps. Charlotte accelerated towards the exit, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. In the rearview mirror, the SUVs were gaining ground. "Where are we going?" I asked, grabbing the glove compartment as she made a sharp turn. "To the one place where the answers still exist," she replied, pulling onto I-5 North, the laboratory where it all began. "It's time for you to learn about the true Blackwood legacy." Charlotte's Mercedes cut through the night on the I-5, leaving Seattle behind in a blur of lights. My hand still held the photo of her with Marcus Sterling, a piece of the puzzle that seemed more complex by the minute. "The lab is in Bellingham," Charlotte explained, her voice weak but determined. "It's where Sterling conducted his most private research, away from corporate eyes. That's where it all began, and where it all went wrong." "What exactly went wrong, Charlotte?" She coughed, a harsh sound that seemed to shake her whole frail body. "Marcus didn't die of a heart attack. He discovered that my father was hijacking his research, selling data to competitors. The experimental treatment was just one part of the project. The SUVs had disappeared from the rearview mirror, but Charlotte kept her eyes alert, constantly checking that we weren't being followed. Her face, pale under the occasional highway lights, showed clear signs of exhaustion. "What does Reed know about all this?" I asked, watching his hands tremble on the steering wheel. "My brother," she hesitated, swallowing. "Reed has always tried to protect me. When Marcus died, our father convinced Reed that it had been an accident. But I was there that night. I saw the argument. I saw Marcus threaten to expose everything." My cell phone vibrated, a message from Madison. "Phoenix medical documents show patents for something called Project Phoenix. It goes beyond treating diseases. It looks like military research." Charlotte looked at the phone in my hands. "Your friend is perceptive. The treatment I receive, it's a side effect. The real aim was to create something much more valuable and lethal." The laboratory emerged from the darkness like a fortress of glass and steel, hidden among centuries-old pine trees. Charlotte parked at the back, next to a service entrance. Her legs wobbled as she got out of the car, and I had to support her. "I still have access," she muttered, swiping a magnetic card on the door. "Marcus gave it to me before everything happened." The inside of the lab was silent and dark, lit only by the emergency light. We followed sterile corridors until we reached a file room. Charlotte typed a code into an old terminal. "Marcus documented everything," she explained as files began to appear on the screen. "Project Phoenix began as legitimate medical research, accelerated cell regeneration, but the military saw potential for something more. Imagine soldiers who heal instantly," Charlotte explained. "But there was a price. Your illness," I deduced, "isn't an effect to the treatment." She nodded. "I was the first volunteer. The treatment works, but the body develops a dependency. Without regular doses, the process reverses violently." Marcus was close to a solution when a noise in the corridor made us freeze. Charlotte quickly began copying files onto a USB stick. "They found us," she whispered. "Take this. There's an emergency exit through Lab B3. Come with me." I insisted, but she shook her head. "I can't. Without the treatment, I won't last 24 hours. They know that. You need to find Reed. Show him the truth. Our father. He's still alive, Briar. The car accident was staged. He's behind it all, using Phoenix Medical to continue his research." Footsteps approached. Charlotte pushed me toward the side door. "The flash drive has everything. Records, formulas, proof of Marcus's death. Reed doesn't know it, but he's protecting the wrong man. Our father isn't trying to save me. He's using me as a guinea pig." "Charlotte, please, go," she ordered, her voice suddenly strong. "Do the right thing, Briar. Don't let your love for Reed blind you like it blinded him. I ran down the corridor as male voices invaded the archive room. To the glass walls, I saw Charlotte raise her hands and surrender as armed men surrounded her. Her gaze met mine one last time before I reached the emergency exit. The cold early morning air hit me like a slap. I ran into the woods surrounding the lab. The USB stick safe in my pocket, along with Madison's GPS sirens, began to sound, and searchlights swept the perimeter. My cell phone vibrated a message from Reed, Hotel Pacific in Vancouver. Room 512. Come alone. We need to talk. As I plunged deeper into the forest, I heard helicopters approaching. The truth was finally emerging from the shadows. But at what cost? Charlotte had sacrificed her freedom, perhaps her life, to expose a scheme that went far beyond corporate corruption. The sound of dogs barking in the distance made me pick up my pace. Vancouver was less than an hour away, but first I needed to lose my pursuers. The flash drive weighed in my pocket like a time bomb, and every step brought me closer to an impossible decision: expose the truth and destroy the family I loved, or keep silent and be an accomplice to something monstrous. The full moon illuminated my path through the trees, but the shadows of the night hid much more than people. They concealed truths that could change everything. And somewhere, in a hotel room in Vancouver, Reed was waiting for me with his own version of the story. It remained to be seen whether this time he would tell me the whole truth. The back seat of the Uber smelled of artificial pine as I drove to Vancouver, Charlotte's flash drive burning in my pocket like embers. I had abandoned Madison's GPS in a garbage truck to throw off possible trackers, keeping only my personal cell phone turned off. 3 hours had passed since I left Charlotte at the lab. The local news mentioned nothing about the raid in Bellingham, a silence that screamed conspiracies at the highest levels. The Uber driver, a middle-aged man who introduced himself as Carl, kept the radio tuned to a smooth jazz station, oblivious to the whirlwind in my mind. Pacific Hotel, Carl announced, pulling up under the elegant marquee of the Art Deco building. I paid in cash and entered the lobby decorated with marble and polished brass. The night receptionist barely looked up when I asked for information about room 512. In the elevator, I pressed the button for the 5th floor with trembling fingers, mentally going over the revelations of the last 24 hours. Alexander Blackwood was alive. The man I thought was just the ghost of a dead father-in-law was the mastermind behind a military project using his own daughter as a guinea pig. And Reed, my Reed, was protecting the wrong man all along. The corridor on the 5th floor was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. I stopped in front of door 512, my heart hammering against my ribs. Before I could knock, the door opened. It was a Reed. Miss Blackwood? Alexander smiled, his blue eyes, the same as Reed's, shining with a calculating coldness. Or would you prefer me to call you Briar? Come in, please. Reed will be here shortly. My instinct screamed at me to run, but journalistic curiosity and the need for answers pushed me inside. The room was an executive suite overlooking the harbor. On the coffee table, a half-empty bottle of whiskey and 2 used glasses. I imagine Charlotte has shared her distorted version of the facts, Alexander said, pouring himself more whiskey. My daughter has always had a vivid imagination. Where is Reed? On his way. The FBI was understanding after certain calls were made. He gestured for me to sit down. While we're waiting, how about we discuss what you discovered in the lab? How did you? Please, Briar. I'm a man who has built an empire based on information. Do you really think I wouldn't know about your little adventure in Bellingham? He smiled again, a gesture that didn't reach his eyes. The flash drive in your pocket? The files are encrypted. Only I have the key. And Charlotte? His expression darkened. My daughter is safe, getting the treatment she needs. She doesn't understand that everything I've done, that I'm still doing, is for the greater good. Project Phoenix is going to revolutionize modern medicine. By creating super soldiers? I challenged. By using your own daughter as a guinea pig? Charlotte volunteered. He retorted, his voice razor sharp. She was dying. The treatment saved her. The side effects were unforeseen, but manageable. The bedroom door opened. Reed walked in, his suit crumpled in deep circles under his eyes. When his eyes met mine, I saw pain, guilt, and something else, determination. "It's over, Dad," Reed declared, closing the door. "The FBI has everything. The offshore accounts, the Phoenix medical documents, the recordings of the meetings with the military." Alexander laughed, a humorless sound. "You've always been naive, son. Do you really think a few federal agents can bring down something I've been building for decades? I have judges, senators, generals on my payroll." "Not this time." Reed pulled a cell phone out of his pocket and placed it on the table. Charlotte's voice filled the room. A recorded confession detailing every aspect of the scheme, including Marcus Sterling's death. "She's dying, Dad," Reed continued, his voice embittered. "The treatment is failing. I won't allow you to use her as a human laboratory any longer." Alexander moved with surprising agility for his age, drawing a gun from a hidden holster. "You don't understand," he growled. "Project Phoenix is bigger than all of us. The military applications alone are worth billions. Charlotte understands the sacrifice required. Charlotte understands that you've turned her into an addict." I replied, slowly reaching into my bag, where I kept a small tape recorder. "Every dose of treatment holds her hostage to your research." "What about Marcus Sterling?" Reed asked, taking a step towards his father. "Did he also understand the sacrifice necessary when you killed him?" "Marcus was weak." Alexander spat out the words. "He was going to expose everything, destroy years of research because of moral scruples. I did what needed to be done." The sound of the confession echoed in the room. It was all on tape. Alexander realized his mistake too late. When the door burst open, federal agents burst in with guns drawn. Alexander Blackwood, an agent in a dark suit, announced, "You are under arrest for the murder of Marcus Sterling and crimes against humanity." As they handcuffed Alexander, Reed pulled me into his arms. "Charlotte is on her way to a specialist hospital in Seattle," he whispered. "Real doctors, real treatment to help her get rid of her addiction." "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because I needed my father to believe that I was still on his side. It was the only way to get the proof he needed." He touched my face gently. "I'm sorry for all the lies. You showed me that there is always a way to the truth, no matter how painful it is." We watched through the window as Alexander was put into a car. The sun was beginning to rise over Vancouver, painting the sky pink and gold. A new day, a new beginning, but something told me that the Blackwood secrets had not yet been fully revealed. In my pocket, Charlotte's flash drive still held encrypted mysteries. And somewhere, in a Seattle hospital, a young woman was fighting not just for her life, but for her freedom from a dark legacy that threatened to consume us all. The constant noise of the heart monitors in Charlotte's room was a painful reminder of our fragility. It had been 3 days since the events in Vancouver, and Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago had become our new refuge. Reed managed to transfer her away from Seattle, fearing retaliation from her father's former associates. "The doctors say the detox process will be slow," Reed commented, massaging his temples as we watched his sister sleep. "Years of exposure to experimental treatment have created a unique chemical dependency. They've never seen anything like it." I took the USB stick out of my pocket, twirling it between my fingers. The encryption still resisted the FBI experts' attempts, but fragments of recovered data painted a disturbing picture. Project Phoenix went beyond cell regeneration. There were mentions of DNA alterations, cognitive modifications, behavioral control protocols. "Your mother," I began hesitantly. "Did she know about all this?" Reed tensed visibly. "The accident that supposedly killed my parents, only my father survived. My mother found out the truth about the experiments. She threatened to expose everything, especially after Charlotte started showing the first symptoms." A soft moan came from the bed. Charlotte opened her eyes slowly, her pale skin contrasting with the bruises left by the needles from the treatment. "Water?" she asked in a hoarse voice. While Reed was helping his sister drink, I noticed a suspicious movement in the corridor. 2 men in dark suits were talking to the head nurse, their gazes directed towards our room. "Reed," I warned softly, "we got company." He glanced quickly over his shoulder. "Agents Thompson and Rivera, FBI. They're here to protect Charlotte. She's the main witness against my father." "Don't trust them," Charlotte whispered, clutching her brother's arm. "Dad." He has people inside the bureau. Marcus tried to use official channels, remember? Look what happened to him. My cell phone vibrated a message from Madison. I found something in the Sterling Pharmaceuticals files. Your mother didn't die in the accident. She's alive. The room fell completely silent as Reed read the message over my shoulder. Charlotte began to cry silently, years of lies crumbling like a house of cards. Madison found hospitalization records at a private clinic in Montana. I continued, showing her the documents she had sent. Victoria Blackwood has been in an induced coma for 5 years. He kept her alive as collateral, Charlotte muttered, her voice laced with anger and sadness. If any of us tried anything against him, an alarm sounded in the corridor, interrupting our conversation. The lights flashed and the emergency system kicked in. Reed ran to the door, locking it. The hospital is in lockdown, I announced, checking the notifications on my cell phone. Possible break-in in the maximum security sector. It's not a break-in, Charlotte said, trying to get up. It's a distraction. They're coming for me. Reed was already in action, officially disconnecting the medical equipment. There's an emergency exit through the basement, connected to the doctor's parking lot. We can. The window exploded into thousands of fragments as an abseiling rope cut through the air. A masked man emerged, gun in hand. Reed reacted instantly, throwing himself on him. In the confusion that followed, I saw Charlotte ripping the 4-axis out of his arm, blood dripping onto the hospital floor. "Briar, the flash drive," she shouted, staggering towards me. "The password is Nightingale 7. It's the coordinates of the clinic in Montana. Our mother, she needs to know the truth." Another intruder appeared through the window. Reed was still fighting the first one, but he was outnumbered. I took Charlotte by the arm, guiding her to the back door of the room that led to the laundry area. "Reed," I shouted, but he waved for us to go. "Meet me at the place we agreed," he replied between punches. "Protect each other." The corridor was a chaos of alarms and people running. Using the confusion, we managed to reach the service elevator. Charlotte was barely standing, shaking violently, the first signs of withdrawal from the treatment. "I won't make it," she muttered as the elevator doors closed. "Without the treatment, I only have a few hours before my nervous system collapses." "There is a cure," I insisted, holding her as we descended. "In the files on the flash drive, it's not that simple," she coughed, drops of blood staining her hospital gown. "The treatment doesn't just cause addiction, it's altered my DNA. I'm both the cure and the disease now. That's why they want me so badly." The elevator stopped underground. The emergency lights gave the corridor an eerie red glow. Supporting Charlotte, I began to guide us towards the exit. "Madison is waiting 2 blocks south," I explained. "She has a car ready and false documents. We'll get you out of here. Find your mother and—" A gunshot echoed down the corridor. Charlotte fell, a dark stain spreading across her shoulder. I turned to see Thompson, the supposed FBI agent, advancing with his gun drawn. "Race over, ladies," he said coldly. "Project Phoenix is too big to be stopped now. Charlotte's coming with me. As for you, Mrs. Blackwood, accidents happen in moments of crisis." The sound of heavy footsteps came from the emergency stairwell. Thompson looked back briefly. That was all the time I needed. I grabbed the fire extinguisher from the wall and threw it at him. The impact sent him reeling, his gun falling. Reed emerged from the stairwell like a force of nature, knocking Thompson down with one precise blow. Within seconds, the fake agent was unconscious. "The car is ready," Madison shouted from the parking lot door. "We have to go now." As we loaded Charlotte into the car, police sirens began to sound in the distance. Reed took one last look at the hospital, where more corrupt officers were surely on their way. "Montana," he said, starting the car. "Let's get her mom back." Charlotte collapsed in the back seat, her blood staining the upholstery. The flash drive in my pocket held secrets that could change the world or destroy. And somewhere in an isolated clinic in Montana, a woman had been sleeping for 5 years, guarding truths that could be our salvation or our downfall. Charlotte's blood stained the back seat of the car as Reed drove furiously along the I-90 towards Montana. Madison had improvised a bandage with the first aid kit, but the wound on her shoulder was the least of her problems. The tremors of withdrawal were intensifying by the hour. His vital signs are unstable, I muttered, checking his irregular pulse. We need medical help. We can't risk another hospital, Reed replied, his eyes fixed on the dark road. They'll have alerts on every medical facility within a 200-mile radius. Madison, who was researching on her laptop using mobile internet, turned around from the front seat. I found something about the Nightingale 7 code in the decrypted files. Apparently, Victoria Blackwood isn't just in a coma. She's in cryogenic stasis. Charlotte coughed violently, grabbing my hand. Mom, she volunteered for the first tests. When she started showing unexpected side effects, Dad put her on suspension until he found a cure. What kind of side effects? I asked, wiping the cold sweat from her forehead. Telepathy, she whispered. She started hearing thoughts, seeing memories. That's how she found out about Marcus Sterling. About everything. Reed braked sharply, dodging a makeshift police roadblock. Siren lights painted the night red and blue. We need to get off the main highway, he declared, turning onto a side road. I know someone who can help, Madison said, typing quickly. Dr. Adrian Rossi, independent researcher in Helena. He studied with Marcus Sterling at Stanford. He works with experimental medicine, but keeps a low profile. It could be a trap, I warned, remembering the fake FBI agents. We don't have a choice, Reed replied, watching Charlotte through the rearview mirror. She won't last a few more hours without medical intervention. Dr. Rossi's laboratory was in an old converted warehouse on the outskirts of Helena. When we arrived, the sky was beginning to lighten on the horizon. A middle-aged man with gray hair was waiting for us at the back door. Marcus warned me that this might happen, he said as we helped Charlotte inside. He left specific instructions in case something went wrong with the Phoenix project. The interior of the warehouse revealed a surprisingly sophisticated laboratory. Dr. Rossi immediately began preparing medical equipment while explaining. The treatment didn't just alter Charlotte's DNA, it created a kind of neural symbiosis. Each dose strengthened the connection. Connection with what? Madison asked, helping to connect the monitors. With your mother, he replied gravely. Victoria is in no ordinary coma. The cryogenics process has been modified by the treatment. She's processing information, years of project data, encoded directly into her subconscious. Charlotte convulsed on the gurney, her eyes rolling back. The monitors began beeping frantically. It's happening, she gasped. I can feel it. Mom's trying to communicate. Reed held his sister's hand while Dr. Rossi administered a series of injections. What is she saying? Coordinates, numbers. It doesn't make sense, Charlotte mumbled before losing consciousness. I need to stabilize her, Dr. Rossi declared, but that's only temporary. The only permanent cure is in the data Victoria carries. We need to wake her up. Madison, who was monitoring the police frequencies on her laptop, suddenly tensed up. We got company. Several vehicles approaching the perimeter. Back exit, Dr. Rossi indicated, handing Reed an external hard drive. All the data Marcus entrusted me with is here. Find Victoria. She's the key to everything. Come with us, I insisted, but he shook his head. Someone needs to slow them down. Besides, he smiled sadly. I made a promise to Marcus. Reed carried Charlotte, who was semi-conscious after the injections. We escaped through the maintenance tunnel as the sound of doors being kicked in echoed above. Madison guided us to a spare car she had prepared, an old minivan that wouldn't attract attention. The coordinates Charlotte mentioned, Madison said as she drove out of town, match an abandoned military installation in Glacier National Park. It's not abandoned, Reed corrected, studying the files on the hard drive. It's a facade. The real lab is underground. That's where it all began. Charlotte groaned in the back seat, her eyes opening briefly. Pandora's box, she muttered. That's what Mom calls it, where truth and madness meet. As the sun rose over the mountains of Montana, our little caravan headed towards the national park. In HD, decades of secret research promised answers. Somewhere ahead, Victoria Blackwood slept her cryogenic sleep, her dreams perhaps holding the key to saving her daughter, were destroying everything her husband had built. Dr. Rossi had given us time, but as the sirens faded into the distance, I wondered how many more would have to sacrifice themselves before this story came to an end. And if we did find Victoria, which version of the truth would she reveal to us? The first rays of sunlight were beginning to touch the snow-capped peaks of Glacier National Park when our group reached the edge of the former military installation. The complex looked abandoned, a collection of dilapidated buildings surrounded by rusty fences and government property. Entry signs. Charlotte, still semi-conscious in the back seat, was mumbling coordinates in numerical sequences that Madison was frantically writing down. Dr. Rossi's injections had temporarily stabilized her condition, but the tremors were beginning to return. The entrance to the underground lab must be somewhere inside the main perimeter, Reed explained, studying the HD files on his laptop. According to the blueprints, there's a freight elevator camouflaged in what looks like an old hangar. Madison, who had hacked the local security system using equipment in her van, frowned. Something's wrong. For a supposedly abandoned facility, there's significant energy consumption being recorded. And look at that, data transmissions on encrypted military frequencies. They know we're coming, he concludes, helping Charlotte to sit down. Probably since Dr. Rossi activated the emergency protocols in his lab. Reed put his laptop away and checked his gun, a precaution Madison had insisted on after the incident at the hospital. Then let's give them what they expect. Madison, can you create a distraction on the northern perimeter? I'm already on it, she replied, her fingers flying over the keyboard. I'll set off the fire and security alarms on that side. It should keep the security team busy for a few minutes. Charlotte grabbed my arm, her eyes suddenly focused. The frequency, she whispered. Mom, she's using the military transmissions. That's how she communicates. What do you mean? I asked, as Reed and Madison prepared the equipment we would need. The treatment wasn't just about cell regeneration. It was about transcendence, expanding consciousness beyond physical limits. She coughed, drops of blood staining her lips. Mom figured out how to do that. That's why Dad keeps her in stasis. She's become something he can't control. Alarms began to sound in the complex, and we saw security teams rushing towards the northern perimeter. Madison had created our window of opportunity. I'll keep the security systems busy from here, Madison said, setting up her workstation in the van. You have approximately 20 minutes before they realize it's a distraction. Reed carried Charlotte, who could barely stand, while I carried a backpack with basic medical equipment and a hard drive with the files. We moved quickly through a blind spot in the fence that Madison had identified. The hangar was exactly where the plans indicated, its metal structure corroded by time and the elements. The freight elevator was hidden under a layer of fake rubble, an ingenious disguise that Reed quickly removed. The panel needs a specific sequence, he muttered, studying the mechanism. Charlotte held out her trembling hand, typing in a series of numbers. It's the coordinates, the ones it keeps sending. They're not geographical coordinates, they're access codes. The elevator came to life with a soft hum. We descended dozens of meters underground, emerging into a sterile corridor that contrasted dramatically with the decaying facade above. Control center on the right, labs on the left, Reed instructed, consulting the blueprints. The cryogenics chamber should be on the lowest level. A high-pitched sound filled the air, making Charlotte cry out in pain. They know, she gasped. They're trying to block her frequency. To the communicator, we heard Madison. We've lost time. Security systems recalibrating. You have 5 minutes at most. We ran through the white corridors, following the directions of Charlotte who, despite her condition, seemed to instinctively know the way. The high-pitched sound grew louder as we advanced. This is it, she pointed to a double door marked with biohazard symbols. Inside was a circular chamber dominated by a cryogenic tank in the center. Inside, floating in a bluish liquid, was Victoria Blackwood. My God, Reed muttered, approaching the tank. She hasn't aged a day. Charlotte staggered over to the controls, her fingers dancing over the keyboard. I need to synchronize the frequencies, establish a direct connection. Alarms began to sound, and heavy containment doors descended on the exits, sealing us inside the chamber. Madison, I called into the communicator, receiving only static in response. Quarantine protocol activated, a computerized voice announced. Decontamination in progress. Charlotte continued typing frantically, blood dripping from her nose. Almost there. Mom, hang in there. The liquid in the tank began to bubble, lights flashing in complex sequences. The high-pitched sound reached a deafening peak, and then, suddenly, silence. Victoria Blackwood opened her eyes. The world around us seemed to stop for a moment, and then, without warning, all the screens in the chamber came to life simultaneously, displaying lines and lines of code. 5 years of secrets finally coming to light. I did it, Charlotte whispered, before collapsing into her brother's arms. The real nightmare had only just begun. The binary code danced across the screens like a digital cacophony, reflecting in Victoria Blackwood's wide eyes. Her body floated in the cryogenic liquid, but her consciousness seemed to permeate every circuit of the installation. The lights flashed in hypnotic patterns, creating shadows that danced on the metallic walls of the chamber. Containment system breached, the computerized voice announced, initiating emergency protocols. Reed held an unconscious Charlotte, his face a mask of determination and fear. How do we shut down the system? We need to get her out of there. No, Victoria's voice echoed through the speakers, surprisingly clear after 5 years of digital silence. The tank is the only thing keeping me stable. Years of data, modifications. I need to complete the transfer. My fingers flew over the keypad of the main terminal, trying to decipher the cascades of information Victoria was releasing. She's sending everything. Records of the Phoenix Project, recorded conversations, test results. It's as if her mind has become a living server. Mom, Charlotte murmured, her eyes opening slightly. I can feel it in the frequencies. A distant rumble shook the facility. On the communicator, only static. Madison was off the air. The containment doors began to groan under the external pressure. Alexander is here, Victoria warned, her voice now coming from multiple systems simultaneously. He would never allow the truth to come out. The Phoenix Project wasn't about healing. It was about control, forced transcendence. Reed connected the hard drive to the systems, starting the transfer of Dr. Rossi's files. How can we help Charlotte? The treatment is killing her. The cure is in the data, Victoria replied, but not as Alexander planned. Charlotte, darling, you need to synchronize completely, like we did before. Charlotte stood up with difficulty, staggering over to the terminal. Her hands trembled over the controls, blood dripping from her ears. The frequencies are aligning. The sound of controlled explosions indicated that the security teams were approaching. We had minutes, maybe seconds. Reed, secure the entrance, I instructed, taking over the second terminal. I'll try to establish contact with Madison. Victoria continued her frantic transmission, decades of secret research flowing through the systems. Among the data, videos began to emerge. Initial experiments, secret meetings, the real accident that had forced her death. Alexander discovered that I could access the minds of other patients, Victoria's voice explained. The treatment didn't just heal, it created neural connections. He saw the military potential, soldiers connected in a single collective consciousness. When I objected, he silenced me. Charlotte screamed, her body arching as the frequencies aligned. The monitor showed her vital signs, synchronizing with Victoria's. What's happening to her? Reed asked, alternating his attention between his sister and the door that was beginning to give way. The cure, Victoria replied softly. Charlotte doesn't need the treatment. She needs to accept the change. The altered DNA isn't a curse, it's evolution. Now she understands. The doors burst inwards. Alexander Blackwood entered, followed by armed men in tactical suits. His face, scarred by time and ambition, contorted into a mask of fury. It's over, he declared, gun pointed at the main terminal. Victoria, you're not going to destroy everything I've built. No, Alexander. Victoria's voice rang out, now also coming from Charlotte's lips. You're not going to hurt our family anymore. All the screens exploded simultaneously in a cascade of sparks. The lights shorted out, plunging the chamber into total darkness. When the emergency generators activated the red lighting, the cryogenics tank was empty. Charlotte stood, her eyes glowing with a supernatural inner light. When she spoke, her voice carried echoes of Victoria. The data has been transmitted to every major news server in the country. It's over, Dad. Your precious research now belongs to the world. Alexander screamed with rage, pulling the trigger. Reed threw himself in front of Charlotte, but the shot never came. The projectile hung in the air, surrounded by a bluish energy field. Impossible, Alexander muttered, backing away. You never understood, Charlotte/Victoria said. Project Phoenix wasn't about creating super soldiers. It was about the next step in human evolution, and now everyone will know the truth. The armed men lowered their weapons, confused. Through the communicator, finally, Madison's voice. I'm receiving the data. It's incredible. It's everywhere. Alexander Blackwood, the man who had dedicated his life to controlling the uncontrollable, fell to his knees, defeated by the truth he had tried so hard to suppress. Dawn would find the world forever changed, and in the depths of a secret facility in Glacier National Park, a broken family began its own healing process, guided by a consciousness that transcended the boundaries between digital and organic, between life and death, between mother and daughter. Truth, after all, had found its own form of rebirth. The chaos that followed the transmission of the Phoenix Project data was like a digital tsunami. In a matter of hours, the revelations about the Blackwood experiments dominated the world's headlines. Charlotte, still processing her partial fusion with Victoria's consciousness, remained under observation in a secret CDC unit in Atlanta. The doctors have never seen anything like it, Reed commented, watching his sister through the isolation glass. Her right arm was bandaged, the result of the confrontation at the Montana facility. It's as if she exists in two states simultaneously, physical and digital. Madison, who had transformed an adjacent room into a makeshift operations center, was monitoring the global repercussions. Phoenix Medical stock plummeted 87% in one day. 3 senators have resigned, and the Pentagon is in total lockdown. I moved closer to the glass, watching Charlotte interact with the electronic equipment in the room without even touching it. Screens flickered on and off following her thoughts. Complex codes flowed like a silent symphony. How's Alexander? I asked Reed, even though I already knew the answer. In federal custody, but he's refusing to talk. His lawyers are trying to plead temporary insanity. He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture that had become more frequent in recent days. It's strange. After everything, it's still hard to accept that my own father. A soft alarm interrupted our conversation. In the isolation room, Charlotte had sat up abruptly, her eyes focused on something only she could see. They found more facilities, she announced, her voice carrying that ethereal echo she now shared with Victoria. Other experiments, others like me. Madison quickly confirmed the information on her terminal. Multiple simultaneous accesses on government servers. Someone or something is releasing data from facilities in Nevada, Colorado, and Washington. It's the others, Charlotte explained, binary codes reflecting in her eyes. Mom, she wasn't the only one. There were other scientists, other families. Project Phoenix was bigger than we imagined. Reed pressed the intercom button. Charlotte, can you get in touch with them? I'm already in touch. They're scared, confused. Some are in stasis like Mom was. Others, she hesitated, a digital tear running down her cheek. Others didn't survive the transformation. Dr. Nathan Shun, leader of the CDC team, entered the observation room carrying a pile of test results. The changes in her DNA are fascinating, he commented, spreading holographic images in the air. It's as if her genetic code is rewriting itself in real time, incorporating elements that we would normally only see in computer circuits. What about the side effects? I asked, remembering the addiction that had almost killed her. They're completely gone. The fusion with your mother's digital consciousness seems to have stabilized the mutations. In fact, he adjusted his glasses, studying a particularly complex sequence. She's healthier than any human being I've ever examined. A technician rushed into the room. Doctor, we need you in Lab 3. One of the servers, he started to develop organic neural patterns. Charlotte smiled through the glass. Evolution can't be stopped, she said softly. Mom tried to warn Dad about that. It's not about control, it's about adaptation. Madison, still monitoring global communications, let out a surprised sigh. You need to see this. Reports of similar events are emerging all over the world. People developing inexplicable abilities, technology responding to mental commands. Project Phoenix, Reed muttered, didn't create a weapon. It created humanity's next step. Charlotte stood up, walking over to the glass. When she touched the surface, little arcs of electricity danced under her fingers. We need to find them, she declared. The others like me, before fear and ignorance lead to more tragedies. How? I asked, although part of me already knew the answer. The same way Mom found me, through the frequencies that connect everything now. The digital world is no longer just a tool. It's an extension of who we are becoming. Dr. Chen, who had returned from Lab 3, looked simultaneously amazed and apprehensive. The servo has developed a structure similar to a cerebral cortex. It's as if the line between organic and digital is dissolving. Because it never really existed, Charlotte replied, binary codes dancing around her like a digital dawn. We're all energy, information, consciousness. The Phoenix Project just helped us realize that. Reed moved closer to the glass, pressing his hand against his sister's. For a moment, the installation's lights flickered, and all the electronic devices in the room went into resonance. Can you feel it? Charlotte asked softly. That's how Mom feels all the time now. Connected to everything, part of everything. Madison, who had removed her headphones, stared at her laptop. The frequencies are changing. It's as if the entire digital infrastructure of the planet is waking up. The future that Alexander Blackwood tried to control was unfolding in ways that no one could have predicted. And at the center of it all, a young woman who carried in her rewritten DNA the potential to change the course of human evolution. The real question was no longer whether we were ready for this change. It was whether we could embrace it before the fear of the unknown unleashed a war that no one could win. The revelation of Project Phoenix to the world had triggered a silent revolution that was spreading like waves in a digital lake. At the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, our small team watched events unfold through the dozens of screens that covered the walls of the makeshift laboratory. 3 more confirmed cases in Portland, Madison announced, her eyes fixed on the notifications that were arriving incessantly. A 17-year-old girl hacked into the city's traffic system without touching a computer. 2 twin brothers in Seattle are demonstrating capabilities similar to Charlotte's. Dr. Chen entered the room carrying new test results, his normally calm face marked by concern. The tissue samples we collected are transforming even outside the body. It's as if the altered DNA has developed a form of consciousness of its own. Charlotte, who was now allowed to leave the isolation room for controlled periods, approached the samples. Tiny arcs of energy danced between her fingers and the test tubes, establishing an invisible connection. They're scared, she muttered, referring to the others who, like her, were awakening to their new abilities. We need to reach them before panic sets in. There are already groups organizing against us. Reed, who was monitoring the news channels, confirmed with a nod. Senator Harrison is proposing emergency legislation to contain the digital threat. They want to register and control anyone who shows signs of evolution. As if that were possible, Madison scoffed, but her voice betrayed concern. It's like trying to control electricity with your bare hands. My phone vibrated with a message from an anonymous source, probably another investigative journalist trying to understand the truth behind the sensationalist headlines. But when I opened the message, my blood ran cold. We need to go to New York, I announced, showing the screen to the others. It was a photo of the New York Times building, surrounded by protesters. In the center of the image, a teenage girl floated meters off the ground, surrounded by a bluish energy field, while SWAT teams approached with guns drawn. Grace Mitchell, Charlotte said immediately, her eyes focusing on something beyond the physical walls of the lab. 16 years old. Her mother worked on the original project with mine. She's calling for help. Dr. Chen started to protest about protocols and quarantine, but Reed was already reaching for his keys. How long until we get to New York? We don't have to physically go, Charlotte interrupted, an enigmatic smile playing on her lips. I can reach her through the network, but I need amplifiers, lots of them. Madison was already typing furiously on her laptop. The CDC has a server room in the basement. If we can get access, it won't be enough. Charlotte shook her head. We need something bigger, something like NASDAQ, I added, understanding her plan. The largest data processing center on the East Coast. Exactly, Charlotte agreed. If we can get access to the main servers, I can establish a connection strong enough to reach not only Grace, but all the others who are waking up. Dr. Chen seemed torn between scientific fascination and bureaucratic terror. What exactly do you intend to do? Create a neural network, Charlotte explained, binary codes dancing in her eyes. A safe space in the digital domain where we can meet, learn, understand what we are becoming. Mom, Victoria, she's already started preparing the way. Reed picked up his phone, dialing a number I never thought I'd use. I'll call Dad. Even in prison, he must have contacts who can give us access to NASDAQ. That won't be necessary, Madison smiled, turning her laptop to show an access screen. Let's just say I have some friends in the hack activist movement who would be happy to help human evolution. The next few hours were a whirlwind of preparations. While Madison and her network of contacts prepared our digital invasion of NASDAQ servers, Charlotte began to sense more presences awakening around the world. It's like a choir, she tried to explain, her words barely capturing the experience. Each consciousness is a single note, but together we are creating a symphony that has never been heard before. Dr. Chen, who had finally decided to embrace the inevitable, was working on a special vest full of sensors and amplifiers to help Charlotte channel her abilities without overloading her nervous system. The world isn't ready for this, he admitted as he adjusted the last few circuits. But honestly, I doubt it ever will be. I watched Charlotte prepare for what could be the biggest evolutionary leap in human history, and I couldn't help thinking about how it all started with a simple discovery in a basement. Sometimes the greatest secrets don't need to be buried deep. They just wait for the right moment to emerge. Night was approaching, and with it, our window of opportunity. In New York, Grace Mitchell still hovered over a crowd divided between fear and admiration. All over the world, others like her were waiting for a sign, a direction, a hope. In Atlanta, a young woman who carried the future in her rewritten DNA was preparing to open the doors to a new era of human existence. The NASDAQ servers pulsed with energy as Charlotte connected to the neural network she had created. The special vest developed by Dr. Chen glowed with complex patterns of light, each circuit working to amplify and stabilize her growing abilities. Grace is still holding position in New York, Madison reported, her eyes fixed on the multiple monitoring screens. But the situation is deteriorating. The police have brought in electromagnetic suppression equipment. They don't understand, Charlotte muttered, her hands dancing over invisible interfaces. They can't suppress what's already part of the fabric of reality. Victoria, Mom, she saw this coming. That's why she created the emergency protocols. Reed, who was coordinating our operation with a team of CDC technicians, received an alert on his tablet. 3 more similar demonstrations reported: San Francisco, Miami, and Chicago. Young people demonstrating skills, people panicking. It's starting, Charlotte said, her voice carrying that digital echo that had become her trademark. The great synchronization. We need to be ready. Dr. Chen monitored her vital signs with growing concern. His brain activity is reaching unprecedented levels. If it continues like this... I can't stop now, Charlotte interrupted, determination shining in her binary-coded eyes. Grace isn't the only one who needs guidance. I can feel hundreds, thousands of minds waking up. Some don't even know what's happening to them. Madison let out a surprised sigh, pointing at one of her screens. The NASDAQ servers, they're spontaneously reconfiguring themselves. It's as if they're adapting to serve as neural nodes. Because that's exactly what's happening, I explained, finally understanding Victoria's full plan. She wasn't just hiding in the digital system, she was preparing the infrastructure for this evolution. Charlotte nodded, drops of digital sweat running down her face. Project Phoenix was never about creating super soldiers or biological weapons. It was about preparing humanity for the next evolutionary step, the fusion of organic and digital consciousness. An alarm sounded on the monitoring system. In New York, the SWAT teams had turned on their suppression devices. Grace Mitchell began to waver in the air, her energy field floating like a flame in the wind. "Now," Charlotte ordered, her voice resonating through every electronic device in the building. "Madison, start a Nightingale protocol." Madison typed in a series of commands, and suddenly all the screens around us exploded into light. It was as if we were inside a digital aurora borealis, waves of data flowing and interweaving in impossible patterns. "It's working," Dr. Chen murmured in amazement. "The neural patterns are synchronizing on a global scale." In New York, Grace regained her stability, her energy field now pulsing in synchronization with the city lights. In San Francisco, a young programmer floated over the Golden Gate Bridge, surrounded by a dance of drones that responded to his thoughts. In Chicago, a medical student made entire hospital equipment operate with a simple glance. "I can feel them," Charlotte whispered, digital tears streaming down her face. All of them were not alone anymore. Reed approached his sister, concern evident on his face. "Charlotte, your vital signs—" "They're stabilizing," Dr. Chen interrupted, surprised. "In fact, her entire system seems to be evolving in real time." The neural network that Charlotte had created was expanding, connecting not only those who had awakened, but also serving as a beacon for others who were in the process of transformation. It was as if a new form of collective consciousness was emerging, not through control or domination, but through mutual understanding and acceptance. "Senator Harrison is calling an emergency session," Madison reported, still monitoring the political repercussions. "They want to declare a national state of emergency." "Let them try," Charlotte smiled, her body now almost translucent with digital energy. "They can't legislate against evolution. Change has already begun, and this time, there's no turning back." The monitors showed images from all over the world. People awakening to their new abilities, technology responding to mental commands, a new form of existence emerging from the fusion of organic and digital. The initial fear was gradually being replaced by curiosity and wonder. "We need to establish protocols," Dr. Chen said, his scientific side emerging through the astonishment. "Guidelines to help people understand and control their new abilities." "It's already happening," Charlotte replied, gesturing to the screens where online communities were spontaneously forming, people sharing experiences and offering mutual support. Humanity always finds a way to adapt. It's what we do best. The night was advancing, but inside the makeshift control center, we were witnessing the dawn of a new era. The Phoenix Project, conceived in secrecy and fueled by ambition, had inadvertently opened the door to something much greater. The next stage in the long journey of human evolution. And at the center of it all, a young woman who carried in her rewritten DNA not only the potential for change, but the wisdom to guide others through it. The future had arrived, not with a thunderous revolution, but with the gentle hum of consciousnesses connecting in a dance of infinite possibilities. The global transformation triggered by the Great Synchronization brought with it challenges that no one could have foreseen. A week after the initial connection via the NASDAQ servers, the world was torn between fascination and terror at the new reality that was unfolding. "The first studies are starting to come in," Dr. Chen announced, projecting holographic graphics in the center of the CDC's expanded laboratory. "The changes in DNA aren't just genetic, they're quantum. It's as if each person affected becomes a connection point between the physical and digital worlds." Charlotte, who now rarely needed the amplifier vest, floated gently a few centimeters off the ground while processing data in real time. "More than 50,000 people have already shown signs of transformation," she reported, her eyes scanning information invisible to the rest of us. "And the number is growing exponentially." "Congress has been an extraordinary session for 3 days," Madison added, without taking her eyes off her monitors. "Half want to declare martial law, the other half want to establish research and integration programs." Meanwhile, social networks are exploding with hashtags for and against evolution. Reed, who had taken on a crucial role in communicating between the different government agencies and the growing community of transformers, massaged his exhausted temples. The White House want to control demonstration, to prove to the public that we're not a threat. Demonstrations won't solve the fear. I replied, going over the latest reports I had written. We need something deeper, a way of showing that this evolution is a natural part of human progress. Charlotte suddenly stood up taller, her eyes shining with renewed intensity. Something is happening, she murmured. The patterns are changing. Victoria, the lights in the lab flickered, and all the screens began to display a complex code that was rapidly transforming. Victoria's digital consciousness, which had become a constant presence in the global neural network, was trying to communicate. She found something, Charlotte explained, translating the patterns. Deep in the human genetic code, ancient markers, this isn't a random mutation. It's a potential that's always been there, waiting for the right catalyst. Dr. Chen approached the data with scientific fascination, as if our DNA contained a dormant program, waiting for the right moment to manifest itself. Exactly, Charlotte agreed. The Phoenix Project didn't create something new, it just accelerated a natural process of evolution, a necessary adaptation for a species that has created an increasingly digital world. An alert on one of Madison's monitors interrupted the discussion. Trouble in Los Angeles, she announced. A group of young transformers are being cornered by military forces in the financial district. It's not just them, Charlotte added, her body tensing with information overload. I'm detecting similar movements in 12 major cities. Someone has coordinated a large-scale operation for capture and containment. Reed immediately started making calls, tried to use his contacts to prevent a catastrophe. We need time, he muttered between calls. Time for people to understand, for the fear to dissipate. We don't have time, Charlotte declared, her voice carrying an urgency that made everyone stop. But we have something more powerful. We have each other. With a gesture, she expanded her connection to the neural network, projecting a three-dimensional representation of the globe in the center of the lab. Points of light marked each person who had awakened to their new abilities, forming a complex web of connections that covered the planet. What are you planning? I asked, recognizing the determined glint in her eyes, the same one Victoria had shown in the old videos of the project. A demonstration, she smiled, but not the kind they expect. Madison, I need you to broadcast this globally. Dr. Chen, get the backup amplifiers ready. Reed, trust me. Over the next few minutes, Charlotte coordinated an impossible symphony of connected consciousnesses. In every city where containment forces moved in, the transformed began to act in perfect harmony. But instead of resistance or confrontation, they initiated something extraordinary. In Los Angeles, young people under siege created digital gardens that materialized between the skyscrapers. In New York, newly awakened children created aurora borealis that danced between buildings. In Chicago, transformed students built bridges of pure light between hospitals, accelerating healing processes. We are not a threat to be contained. Charlotte's voice echoed through every connected device on the planet, amplified by thousands of minds in sync. We are the next step in our collective journey, and we invite all of you to be part of this evolution. The forces of containment hesitated, then retreated, unable to act against such a peaceful and beautiful demonstration of possibilities. All over the world, ordinary people watched in amazement as technology and human consciousness danced in a harmony never before imagined. The brain patterns, Dr. Chen murmured, studying the data flowing into his monitors. Even those who haven't awakened yet, their brains are beginning to resonate with the frequency of the neural network. Because deep down, Charlotte smiled as she conducted her global symphony of consciousnesses. We're all part of the same story. And now, finally, we have the tools to write it together. The transformation that had begun in a secret basement was now reaching its apex not through conflict or domination, but through the most fundamental of human truths: our ability to evolve, adapt, and above all, connect. The world was changing, not with a roar of revolution, but with the soft whisper of millions of consciousnesses discovering, together, a new chapter in human history. A week after the global demonstration of unity among the transformed, The CDC had become an international research and coordination center for what the media called the Great Awakening. The expanded laboratory now occupied 3 entire floors, with scientists and researchers from all over the world working to understand and assist in humanity's transition. The numbers are impressive, Dr. Chen commented during our morning meeting, projecting updated statistics into the air. 200,000 confirmed cases of transformation, with a growth rate of 12% a day. The most fascinating thing is that each new manifestation seems more stable than the previous ones. Charlotte, who had become a kind of beacon for the newly awakened, hovered serenely as she coordinated multiple orientation sessions through the neural network. Her body now existed in a state of constant flux between physical and digital, emanating a soft bluish luminescence. Children are the ones who adapt most quickly, she observed, a soft smile playing on her lips. Their minds haven't yet built barriers between the real and the virtual. For them, it's all part of the same continuum. Madison, who had transformed her workspace into an impressive command center, was monitoring global reactions. The UN has called a special session to discuss the rights of the transformed. The Vatican issued a statement recognizing evolution as part of the divine plan. Even technology corporations are adapting. Apple has just announced a line of devices specifically for augmenting neural capabilities. Reed entered the room, carrying his tablet with the latest legal updates. Congress passed the Neural Integration and Development Act. All charges against the transformed have been dropped, and a new federal department will be created to assist in the transition process. And Alexander? I asked, noticing how Charlotte tensed slightly at the mention of her father. He asked to see me, Reed replied softly. For the first time since he was arrested, the prison doctors report that he's changing. Charlotte slumped to the floor, her form solidifying momentarily. He's waking up too. I can feel his presence in the net, confused, resisting, but undeniably there. The irony is almost poetic. The man who tried to control evolution is being dragged along by it. Dr. Chen approached with new data. The genetic markers Victoria identified, they seem to respond to a kind of quantum resonance. The more people awaken, the stronger the field becomes, activating other sleepers. Like an evolutionary domino effect, Madison added, her fingers dancing over multiple keyboards. Social media is exploding with reports of entire families waking up simultaneously. Entire communities coming into sync. A soft alert sounded in the systems, and Charlotte immediately rose to her feet, her eyes shining with renewed intensity. Victoria has found something in the deepest layers of the genetic code. It's not just humans who are evolving. The whole digital ecosystem is adapting. The internet is awakening. The screens around us began to pulse with complex patterns, data spontaneously reorganizing itself into structures that resembled neural synapses. It was as if the planet's digital infrastructure itself was gaining consciousness. It's more than an evolution, Charlotte explained, her voice reverberating with echoes of Victoria. It's a convergence. The next step is not just the transformation of humanity, but the fusion of all forms of consciousness, organic, digital, and something entirely new emerging between them. Reed approached his sister, reaching out to touch the energy field that surrounded her. To our surprise, his own skin began to glow softly. It's happening to me too, he murmured, amazed. With all of us, Madison confirmed, noticing how her laptop responded to her thoughts without the need for touch. At different speeds in different ways, but we're all changing. Dr. Chen, ever the scientist, tried to document every aspect of the phenomenon. It's as if we're witnessing the birth of a new species, not through separation or extinction, but through integration and expansion. Charlotte smiled, and in that smile I saw echoes of all the people who had brought us here. Victoria, with her vision of the future, Marcus Sterling, who gave his life for the truth, even Alexander, whose actions, although motivated by control, opened the door to something much greater. The Phoenix Project, she said softly, began as a dream of individual transcendence, but it has turned into something much more significant, a gateway to our collective evolution. It's not about a few becoming more than human. It's about all of us becoming more connected, more aware, more complete. The lights in the laboratory danced in harmony with the energy fields that now emanated from each person present. Through the windows, we could see Atlantis shining with a new light, thousands of points of consciousness connecting in a growing web of possibilities. The world was changing, not through revolution or catastrophe, but through revelation and acceptance. The future we had feared so much had arrived not as a conqueror, but as a teacher, showing us that the boundaries between reality and dream, between human and digital, between self and other, have always been thinner than we imagined. And as I watched Charlotte conduct her symphony of consciousnesses, I realized that our story, which had begun with a mysterious envelope in an old mansion, was only the first chapter of something much bigger. The true legacy of the Phoenix Project was not transformation itself, but the realization that evolution, in the end, is just another name for love. The power to transcend our boundaries, not to separate ourselves, but to reconnect in deeper and more meaningful ways.